Hello and a very warm welcome to a brand new edition of World Panorama with me, Frank PEREIRA, on Rajya Sabha Television. Over the next half an hour, we'll bring you a roundup of all the significant events to have happened around the world this week. But first, a look at the headlines. Iran rocked by its biggest wave of protests in nearly a decade. Tens of thousands of Iranians take to the streets to demand freedom from their government. At least 20 people killed in clashes with security forces. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un reopens key cross-border communication channel with Seoul for the first time in nearly 2 years. Hotline to discuss Winter Olympics in South Korea next month. US President goes to war. Former strategist Steve Bannon. White House lawyers threatened. Former Trump aide cease and desist notice accuses Bannon of defaming the president. And US government says Pakistan has failed to deal with terrorist networks operating on its soil. Washington cuts almost all security aid to Islamabad, freeze to remain until action is taken against Haqqani network and Afghan Taliban. Our top focus on World Panorama this week. More than 1,000 people have been rounded up and detained in Iran over the past week. Rights groups and the US State Department said on Thursday as authorities try to quell the largest street protests in nearly a decade. Amnesty International warned that those being held risk torture and ill treatment in the country's prisons, calling for the release of those arrested for demonstrating peacefully. Let's now take a look at what transpired earlier in the week.
Iranians are free to protest against the government but must not jeopardize security. President Hassan Rouhani said this after 4 days of demonstrations. Speaking at a cabinet session on Sunday, he acknowledged that there were problems that needed to be solved but warned that violence will not be tolerated. He acknowledged grievances about the economic situation, a lack of transparency and corruption, but defended his record.
People have a right to criticize all over the country, but criticism is entirely different from violence and damaging public properties. Those responsible must respect the grounds for legal complaints of the people.
Meanwhile, in a Twitter message on the issue, US President Donald Trump said Iranians are finally getting wise as to how their money and wealth is being stolen and squandered on terrorism. Rouhani rebuffed Trump's comments, saying that he had no right to sympathize with Iranians since just a few months back he called Iran a terrorist nation.
We must not allow the America, which suffers from its own domestic issues, where Americans are worried about their current political and social situation, and someone who from the very first day of coming into the White House has acted against the Iranian nation. Such a person cannot have sympathy for the Iranian nation.
A crowd of Iranian Americans rallied in front of White House on Sunday to voice their support for the ongoing anti-government protest in Iran and to call for overthrow of the leadership of the Islamic Republic. The protests in Iran have been the biggest show of dissent since huge rallies in 2009. There have been clashes in several cities. The anti-government protest started on last week in the northeastern city of Mashhad on the issue of rising food and gasoline prices, but spread to other cities and turned political.
I
am for the freedom of my nation and for the freedom of the people. And I hope that one day all the people of Iran will be freed from their clutches.
9 years ago, there was still hope that there are two groups within the Iranian government, but this demonstration shows that that story is over. The motto of the demonstration was regime change.
The temporary restrictions on the apps Telegram and Instagram have been imposed to maintain tranquility. Telegram in particular is very popular in Iran, with more than 50% of the country's 80 million population said to be active on the app. President Hassan Rouhani was re-elected in May. He championed the 2015 nuclear deal with Western powers that saw sanctions lifted in return for a few limits on Iran's nuclear development. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, joining me this week to talk about this is the editor of Hardnews, Sanjay Kapoor. Welcome and thank you for joining me on the program. You know, what led to these massive protests in Iran?
You know, Iran has been by and large peaceful in this entire very violent neighborhood, but they have very serious economic problems. And this has been primarily aggravated by the US sanctions, which although have been lifted, but there are a lot of things that really haven't happened. The money, it has not got integrated with the world economic system, the world monetary system. So there is, you know, the hope that there would be investment coming in, a lot of things will happen, change the lives of the people, hasn't really happened. So there is loss of jobs, there is unemployment. I've been to Iran and I have seen that there is a great amount of gap between people's qualification and the job that they do. So there is a certain amount of resentment and anger. But what the Iranians have said is that the entire agitation and protests were actually triggered by United States of America. They have blamed them also. If you know that in the Security Council yesterday, the matter came up where US was very forceful in insisting that there should be a discussion. They succeeded in that, but subsequently they want to do with the nuclear deal, which they want to you know, take a relook and they want to trash it, which was not allowed by the other powers who were there. They don't want any kind of discussion to take place. So in a certain way, it is very clear in the minds of Iranians that the protests had some kind of external hand or external agency which was responsible. But I must tell you that Iranians have great experience of handling crowds. In 2009, there was a massive protest when Ahmadinejad was, you know, contesting. We had a Green Party, and that is the time I think Iran administration, the government learned how to handle it by.
Sure. You know, talking about handling the protesters, you know, as far as the establishment, as far as Rouhani is concerned, how big a problem does this protest pose? Because the protests continue even today.
So there has been, in my, you know, I just got in touch with Tehran a short while back. I was told that, you know, protests have actually begun to diminish very rapidly because, you know, they come down very strongly, very heavily on any kind of protest. They haven't used the Revolutionary Guards who have been in the center of entire controversy, because what is being stated in the entire protest is that the money which is being used for Revolutionary Guards should be actually spent on Iran rather than on Lebanon or fighting in Syria. So that linkage has been established, that why should you carry your revolution abroad? First of all, you need to look after the lives of the people. So in a certain way, if you look at it, there is a problem there which needs to be sorted out. Rouhani is very popular and he's considered to be moderate. There are a lot of people who do not want any kind of violence to actually engulf the city. There's fear. They don't want a reputation of Syria or for that matter Afghanistan, because they fear that once a street protest starts, then there would be a case for maybe US or somebody to start intervening. So there is a great amount of fear in the minds of middle class which did not really participate. So the people who really got into the streets were small protests to start with, and they all came from lower middle class who've been very badly savaged by austerity program which has been initiated by President Rouhani in the recent budget. And they fear that, you know, their lives are going to worsen if things don't really happen.
You know, another problem or another thing to keep in mind is that the region itself is in turmoil and we do not want another Iraq-like situation happening there. So how important is it for the establishment to take control and remain in power?
So that is a fear which is driving much of the middle class to ensure that, you know, they do not aggravate the situation on the ground. That is why the protesters in many places were confronted by so-called reformist leaders who went there and they want to tell them to back out rather than actually participate. So there was this great you know, curiosity in the minds of even Western observers that why the protesters don't have leadership, why are they being leaderless. So the thing is that there is a certain amount of movement which is taking place in the life of the, you know, say Iranian influence, whether it is in the neighborhood or within. And there is a fear that anything that, you know, rocks the boat could really turn everything upside down. Because after the victory in Syria, which is seen to be a major achievement of the Iranian government, and especially the Revolutionary Guards, that is something that rankles or troubles Israel and the US.
Sure.
And that becomes a reason to control them. So the thing is,
throw in Saudi too into the scheme of things, you know.
So it's a very complex chemistry, or it's a very incendiary mix which is visible. So in a certain way, Iran could suffer a setback because of the internal turmoil that is believed at the moment. But if they are able to surmount that, then maybe they will continue to exercise a great amount of influence to the discomfort of maybe the US and Israel. And US people think is going to link the street protest to reviewing the nuclear deal.
You know, historically, India and Iran have had a very strong, relationship, very strong ties. What does this do? Does it do anything to ties between India and Iran?
I'm not very sure whether India is going to be really troubled by the internal domestic matters of happening in Iran. India has invested substantially in Chabahar, which is seen to be a port which will sidestep Pakistan and realign much of the region, connect India to North-South corridor, connect it to Tehran, and open up a new geography which had been denied to us. So I don't think we are going to be troubled very much till the time United States of America makes it very, very clear to India that we need to come off our investments in that area. And if that happens, I think India would have to take a call whether we want to go ahead or not. But going by our commitment, I don't think we'll back off.
All right, we'll have to leave to that. Sanjay Kapoor, thank you so much for joining us on the program and putting things into perspective for us. Well, moving on, now US President Donald Trump's lawyers on Thursday sent a notice to former strategist Steve Bannon saying that he had violated a non-disclosure agreement. The war of words started between the White House and Bannon after his revelations maligned the Trump campaign and divulged other details of the administration.
US President Donald Trump's lawyer have threatened legal action against former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon over his recent revelations about the White House administration. Bannon spoke to author Michael Wolff for his new book, Michael Wolff's Fire and Fury Inside the Trump White House. A cease and desist notice sent by Trump's lawyer accuses Bannon of defaming the president. Lawyer Charles Harder also accused Bannon of violating a non-disclosure agreement by speaking about his time on Trump's election campaign. The White House has also dismissed the claims made by Bannon.
I think that is a ridiculous accusation, and one that I'm pretty sure we've addressed many times from here before. And if that's in reference to comments made by Mr. Bannon, I'd refer you back to the ones that he made previously on 60 Minutes, where he called the collusion with Russia about this president a total farce. So I think I would look back at that. If anybody's been inconsistent, it's been him. Certainly hasn't been the president or this administration.
Bannon has also spoken about the president's family for Michael Wolff's new book. He called the president's son and son-in-law's meeting with Russians treasonous.
If you want to see the Trump agenda, it's very simple. It was all in the speeches. He went around to these rallies, but those speeches had tremendous amount of content in them, right? I happen to believe, and I think many others do, he's probably the greatest public speaker in those large arenas since William Jennings Bryan.
Trump has responded to these claims, saying Bannon has lost his mind after losing his White House position. Fire and Fury Inside the Trump's White House is written by Michael Wolff, a journalist and an author. He also wrote a biography of media mogul Rupert Murdoch. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television.
Well, it's time for a short break now, but still to come, the US government cuts almost all security aid to Pakistan, saying it has failed to deal with terrorist networks operating on its soil. The State Department said the freeze would remain in place until Islamabad took action against the Haqqani network and the Afghan Taliban. That and much more on the other side. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Art arisen from a multi-hued cultural canvas. Tradition and cultural fervor dating back centuries. And encircling them all, there's a magic that awes. Embrace your nation's brilliant human warmth. Watch Colours of India, Sundays at 9:30 p.m. on Rajya Sabha Television.
Welcome back. You're watching Rajya Sabha Television with me, Frank PEREIRA. Well, the US government is cutting almost all security aid to Pakistan, saying it has failed to deal with terrorist networks operating on its soil. The State Department said the freeze will remain in place until Islamabad takes action against the Haqqani network and the Afghan Taliban. Earlier, President Trump accused Pakistan of deceiving the US while receiving billions in aid. Pakistan called the attacks on it by US officials incomprehensible and said that they negated the decades of sacrifices made by the Pakistani nation. The US stance has been praised by India and Afghanistan, but China, which is investing tens of billions in Pakistan, has defended Islamabad. The Trump administration had already delayed handing over $255 million in military aid to Pakistan. US State Department has not yet put a dollar value on how much aid was being cut. On Thursday, the State Department also placed Pakistan on a special watch list for severe violations of religious freedom.
Pakistan has not done enough to detain, to take care of, and when I say take care of, I mean round up, terrorist and militant groups operating from within Pakistan. We've had a series of discussions with Pakistan about that, telling Pakistan that they need to take more decisive action. Now, the money that has been suspended at this time does not mean that it will be suspended forever. Pakistan has the ability to get this money back, if you will, in the future, but they have to take decisive action.
Meanwhile, the United States has also threatened to stop all financial aid to Palestine if they refuse to engage in peace negotiations. In a tweet, US President Donald Trump said that the United States may withhold payments to Palestinians because they are no longer willing to talk peace. He said Washington was giving Palestinians hundreds of millions of dollars a year for nothing, saying that the US received no appreciation or respect in return. US Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley has also said Trump has no intention to continue funding the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees unless the Palestinians come to the negotiation table to move forward on peace talks. The move comes almost a month after Donald Trump's December 6th announcement that he recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and would move the US embassy from Tel Aviv.
The president has basically said that he doesn't want to give any additional funding or stop funding until the Palestinians are agreeing to come back to the negotiation table. And what we saw with the resolution was not helpful to the situation. We're trying to move for a peace process, but if that doesn't happen, the president's not going to continue to fund that situation.
Well, news from the Far East. Now, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un reopened a key cross-border communication channel with South Korea for the first time in nearly 2 years. The move is considered to be a major diplomatic breakthrough following a year of escalating hostility that could pave the way for future talks. This has come after Kim's New Year's address, where he said he was willing to send a delegation to next month's Winter Olympics in South Korea.
South Korea has welcomed North Korea's decision to reopen a long-closed border hotline for Korean talks. South Korea confirmed it had received a call from the North.
The government welcomes North Korea's positive message to our suggestions to normalize the border hotline. We'll consult with North Korea over working-level issues of our inter-Korean talks offer through this permanent hotline.
North Korea made the announcement to reopen the hotline almost 2 years after it was disabled on the orders of leader Kim Jong-un. The talks aim to establish a formal dialogue about sending a North Korean delegation to Pyeongchang Winter Olympics in South Korea next month.
By upholding a decision by the leadership, we'll make close contact with South Korea in a sincere and faithful manner. We'll discuss working-level issues related to the dispatch of a Winter Olympic delegation.
Meanwhile, the US has expressed skepticism on North Korea's move, saying that it is up to South Korea whether to hold talks with the North. US President Donald Trump also tweeted that his nuclear button was much bigger and more powerful than the North Korean leaders.
We won't take any of the talk seriously if they don't do something to ban all nuclear weapons in North Korea. We consider this to be a very reckless regime. We don't think we need a Band-Aid, and we don't think we need to smile and take a picture. We think that we need to have them stop nuclear weapons, and they need to stop it now. So North Korea can talk with anyone they want, but the U.S. is not going to recognize it or acknowledge it until they agree to ban the nuclear weapons that they have.
China, on the other hand, said it welcomes and supports all efforts by the two countries to ease tensions on the Korean peninsula.
The North Korea's participation in Winter Olympics has sent a positive message. China welcomes and supports the efforts to improve the bilateral relations, ease the tension on Korean peninsula, and realize the denuclearization of the peninsula.
The two Korean nations have not held high-level talks since December 2015. North Korea cut off communication channels then, reportedly refusing to answer calls. According to the South Korean Unification Ministry, there are a total of 33 direct lines that North and South Korea once used in order to communicate with each other. This particular phone line, established in 1971, is based in Panmunjom. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, much folded around the world this week. Here's a quick roundup of some other international news in Globe Watch. Street crews are busy digging out snow-clogged roads across the US Northeast after a powerful blizzard hit the region. At least 18 people have been killed in the extreme weather conditions. Extreme cold will reach from New England to the Midwest and down to the Carolinas. Temperatures are expected to be nearly 40 degrees Celsius below average across the northeastern United States for the next several days. The United Nations has approved $50 million to meet humanitarian needs in Yemen. The money is the largest ever allocation by the Central Emergency Response Fund. Making the announcement, the UN said that there must be reduction both in fighting on the ground and airstrikes, which have greatly intensified in recent weeks. The agency also stressed the need to have all ports open without interruption so that humanitarian supplies can be shipped to the country. Former Catalan Vice President Oriol Junqueras appeared before a Supreme Court magistrate to appeal a decision to hold him in custody pending trial on charges of sedition, rebellion and misuse of public funds in relation to his role in Catalonia's banned independence drive. If Junqueras is granted bail, he could be present at the formation of Catalan Parliament on January 17th and would be eligible to be voted President of Catalonia if he has enough support from lawmakers. At least 8 people were killed after a boat carrying 48 passengers capsized in Indonesia's Kalimantan island. The National Rescue Agency said 13 passengers remained missing while the rest had been rescued. The boat was on its way from Tanjung Selor to Tarakan on the Indonesian side of Borneo Island when it overturned and sank. The US imposed sanctions on 5 Iranian companies for allegedly contributing to the country's ballistic missile program. The sanctions freeze any property the companies hold in the US and prohibit Americans from dealing with them. Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin linked the move to the recent protests sparked by Iran's economic problems. The US says the Iranian ballistic missile tests violate a UN Security Council resolution that endorses the 2015 nuclear deal between Iran and world powers. Well, let's now shift focus and bring you up to speed with all the sports news you might have missed this week in Sports Action. Egypt forward Mohamed Salah won the African Footballer of the Year award for 2017, finishing ahead of his Liverpool teammate Sadio Mane and of Senegal and Gabon striker Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. Salah grabbed 625 points from a voting panel made up of national team coaches and captains, plus a selection of officials and journalists to win the award. The Premier League match between Chelsea and Arsenal ended in a draw after Hector Bellerin scored the equaliser for Arsenal in extra time. Jack Wilshere scored the opener for Arsenal in the 63rd minute to take a 1-0 lead over Chelsea. But Eden Hazard converted a penalty in the 67th minute to make it 1-1. Marcos Alonso scored the second goal for Chelsea in the 84th minute, making it 2-1. Arsenal made a comeback in extra time as Hector Bellerin scored the equaliser in the 92nd minute to end the game at 2-2. Former world number 1 and American tennis star Serena Williams pulled out of the first Grand Slam of the season, the Australian Open. She said she is not fully ready to return to the season's opening Grand Slam as she believes her preparations are not up to the mark for the competition. Serena, who won last year's Grand Slam title at Melbourne, made a comeback to the circuit last week after giving birth to her baby. New Zealand's Colin Munro and Ish Sodhi topped the ICC T20 player rankings for batsmen and bowlers. Munro finished as the leading run-getter in the recent series against West Indies with 223 runs and jumped 11 places to seal the #1 spot for the first time in his career. Munro now leads second-ranked Aaron Finch of Australia, with India's Virat Kohli at third. In bowling, Sodhi leaped from 10th to 1st, achieving a personal milestone of topping the bowlers' rankings for the first time in his career. And finally, the 34th Harbin International Ice and Snow Festival and the 3rd China International Ice and Snow Tourism Summit officially opened on Friday in Harbin, northeast China. The festival mainly features ice and snow-themed scene spots such as the world's largest ice and snow park and a snow sculpture art expo, as well as diverse ice and snow sports and entertainment. I'm going to leave you with these visuals from China. This is Frank Pereira signing off.
Rhythm is a dancer, it's a soul companion. You can feel it everywhere. Lift your hands and voices, free your mind and join us. You